Hi everybody, my name is Elle and you're listening to Specimens Podcast. It's great to have you here, so thank you for giving me your time. Ordinarily, at the start of every interview, I normally keep my introduction very brief and rush to bring my guests in. But today I'm going to do things a little bit differently. Some of you who are regular listeners may have noticed that the output for my show has reduced enormously as of late. The frequency of the episodes just got lost and time just got bigger and wider between each episode, and I want to talk to you a little bit about why. One of the things that I suffer with, and I know so many other people do too, but I never really hear it spoken about, is the pursuit of perfectionism. Without ever giving myself any grace that I am not a professional presenter with any formal training or a sound engineer or editor, I wanted every episode to be so clipped, so polished, and so immaculate that it became incredibly unsustainable. Trying to perform at 100% all of the time is just unrealistic, and in doing so, you end up creating a much more contrived product, and that's what I felt happened with my show. The more you start to think about everything in this macro, minute detail, the less you're able to produce. And I think that's what happened with my show. It killed my creativity entirely, but I also felt like I lost my voice. So, in a quest to find my voice again, I am going to be stripping things back a little bit more and making things a little bit more casual. Perhaps in my introductions, I might talk about things like this topic, for example, and just make it a little bit more informal. I recognize that I have this incredible platform to use my voice, and I know there are so many barriers to entry in the conservation and science world. Not only have I experienced it myself, but I also see it from my observation now that I'm within that space. So I'd like to find a space here where I can be the barbell between science and academia and these huge policies that take a lot to dismantle and regular people. I really would like for this podcast to feel like your friends are sitting in the other room having a conversation about the climate, and they're trying to extract from these huge topics meaningful and impactful ways that they can make change and can actually create tangible output in the ways that we protect and save our planet. And so that kind of segues really nicely to today's episode because I feel like it felt just like that. It was so lovely to chat with today's guests because it really felt as though we were just friends chatting about the climate. There's a lot of natter, chatter, and laughter, and I think that really helps to dissolve and diffuse these hard-hitting topics. And you'll hear my guests go into detail about humour is used to do exactly that. Anyway, I hope you haven't switched off. I hope you're still here and excited for today's episode. And just a reminder to those of you who do suffer with perfectionism that as part of the human experience, we evolve. We have to allow ourselves space to evolve. And it's okay to be a little messy. It's okay to be unpolished. And I think that is the most authentic version of ourselves that we can be. So I really hope that you're open and receptive to this new change, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds. So thank you. Enjoy today's episode. Here is Ryan and Nadia. Oh, I'm really excited about this one. Okay, I'd love to give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourself, so take it away.
After you, Nadia.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I am Nadia, co-host of Into the Wild podcast. What else about me? Ornithologist, land justice campaigner. That'll do. I want to know. I'm some kind of ambassador for something this year.
Nadia's got so many titles she
I
can't keep
know.
track.
I don't know. I go on, Ryan. You.
Hi everyone, I'm Ryan Dalton. I'm the other co-host of Into the Wild podcast. I have been wildlife and conservation podcasting for 5 years. On top of that, I'm a presenter, I was a comedian, and I am a professional dog walker in North London. And basically, I'm a naturalist. I love the natural world.
Okay, so you guys wear so many different hats, and before we kind of move into what you do together today, I want to know a little bit about where the love for the natural world first started for you. I know you've mentioned kind of conservation related jobs and titles, but when did you first started noticing the natural
God, it's
world?
such a difficult question, isn't it? Because we're in this career, we've had to reflect on it for so many reasons, I think, in our lives, haven't we? And then I'm worried that I'm starting to augment the truth a little bit. And, you know what
Just
I mean?
making up a fairy
And then I'm like,
tale.
yeah, there was a day when I sat under a tree, you know, like I think like Isaac Newton and the apple. They never happened,
Yeah.
do you know? And I'm like, when was my first moment? I feel like, you know, there wasn't a moment, but it feels very close to me. It feels familiar, in my just the rhythm of my being. There are little photographic snaps and memories of being youthful, tiny little human looking at tiny little things, and like involving killing things. I remember, like, you know, like squashing no, but you know, like, you know, the little red mites that you have on oh God, I'm sorry, insect people. It's not an insect, I bet it's a spider. You know, the little red mites on
I
walls.
hope Ash Whiffin's not listening.
And then like pulling off Daddy Long legs, which are harvestmen, actually, their legs. Just like, you know, like, how does I didn't become a serial killer. But yeah, no, I really feel like it's been part of my I can't remember a time when something to do with the natural world didn't form a part of my rhythm, whether it was touching leaves, pulling them apart, popping seed things, looking at insects, intentionally, like, you know, being obsessed with whales and dolphins, even though I'd never really seen any. Like, it was just always present. And I think we're the generation of animals of farthing wood, so I think it was just bound to happen.
I was going to say my answer echoes Nadia until she brought up murdering
The
things.
dead things, yeah.
So that kind of is where I draw out of that. But I'm apart from that, I am going to echo. I mean, I was very privileged to grow up with a family that did like spending time outdoors, and grandparents that had lovely gardens that backed onto woodlands, and it was kind of, I guess, inevitable from that sense that one of either me or my brother were going to fall in love with nature and be intrigued by it. And much like Nadia as well, is, you know, my nan would scream at me for popping seed pods everywhere and like tell me to stop. But she also taught me things like, we go around the garden to collect the slugs and the snails to remove them rather than putting pellets down. And
Where
you
did
know,
they
we
go?
sit
Where did they go when you removed them?
into the woodland. I took them to the woodland,
Okay.
and the next day they'd be back, and I'll do it again. I'm pretty sure it was only an activity that for when Ryan was there, but it was it just stayed with me for a very long time, and being, you know, into my teens still, like, you know, in the garden looking at the spider that's caught the fly in the web and things like that, and just being absolutely blown away by it and wanting to watch it closer and closer and closer. So it's just something that's always been an itch that I've wanted to scratch and get a bit further and have a look and be intrigued by. But that journey has changed massively as I've, you know, explored it in my 30s and looking at like the conservation and the mindset around that. I think my mind, obviously, you know, excluding my child and early teen years, but certainly my early adult years and my focus on nature, and my views and opinions have massively changed to where I am now, hugely.
Yeah. I'm sure there'll be so many people listening, kind of nodding along and resonating to the childlike wonder that's led you guys to where you are today. But everyone wants to know, how did your paths cross?
Well, Nadia was working as a waitress in a cocktail bar, weren't you?
He just kept ordering. I was going to say
Whiskey
Long
sour
Island
after
iced tea
whiskey
just
sour.
because you're a long man. What is your longest cocktail?
Serve me your longest drink.
What is your
It was
most
very organic the
album?
way we met.
It was, yeah. I think Lucy.
We were forced to meet.
Lucy invited you. So I live with Lucy Hudson, Lapwing, and she invited Ryan. Actually, she said you'll really get along with Ryan, and she
also said the same to me about Nadia, so there was automatic tension at the beginning.
So I was always just like, well, I probably won't then. Do you know when people tell you you're going to like this person, you're like, probably won't like them.
Look at you now.
And then, yeah, I know. And then you came to a Christmas party that I had, but I didn't talk to you for 4 days.
No, we didn't.
Christmas party.
It was 4 days. But we didn't really talk at all, did we?
There's about 25 people there, and then over the course of the 4 days we were just drunk, so we didn't. And then so Lucy, I think, tried again, bless her, and invited you over to stay in around about June a couple of years ago, 3 years ago. And we just that night we were just dancing in the kitchen. And
It
I
was the
think
moment in the kitchen when we started to dance to Hearsay. I think that's when you realised that
this is
this
my
was
friend.
we
You
were
actually
about
also
to.
brought me an Into the Wild t-shirt. Did you know that this was going to happen?
I did do that. I recruited early.
So that's how we met, and it was lovely.
Yeah, that's how we
and
met.
then I think we didn't stop talking every day ever since then.
That's actually true. I tell people that and they don't believe me, but literally from that moment that I was up on the Isle of Bute, so that was May, I think, 2022.
Yeah.
From that moment on, every single day, without missing one, we spoke on the phone.
Yeah.
Every single day. It was mad.
Like an old married couple.
Yeah, literally. Arguing all the time.
We actually, the really weird thing about mine and Ryan's dynamic, since day one, our conversations have been quite antagonistic with each other, but we've never really hurt one another with it.
No, never.
And there's something that's really special about my conversations with Ryan, which is we have this like agreement, which we never said out loud. We never spoke about it. It's just happened, which is that whenever one of us just gets bored of the conversation, we just say, okay, bye, and hang up, and don't.
Bye, and hang up.
It's really savage, but it really it helps me answer the phone to him because I know that I'm not going to have like the awkward, I'm going to have to listen. I can just go, look, I'm going, bye. And it's great.
I'll be honest, I do find Nadia does it way more than I do.
We both do.
I don't. Yeah, it's not often that I just cut it short.
Well, hopefully you won't do that today because there's so much more that I want to learn about you guys. So obviously Ryan, it kind of got dropped in there a little bit that Ryan recruited Nadia. So Ryan, was the show initially your baby or was it kind of a love child? I presume it's something that you started and Nadia came in.
Yeah, it was something. So I was a stand-up comedian before COVID, and then obviously when COVID hit, my diary disappeared, and I decided to take a break from stage. But I wanted to keep creating and doing something. So being focused on the natural world, conservation and wildlife, I thought maybe starting a podcast in 2020. So yeah, I started it then, and it for 3.5 years, was doing it on my own weekly, which seems a lifetime ago now.
Yeah.
And then, and then so basically after meeting Nadia, I wanted to, because I'd been having these conversations with people all around the world in different jobs to do with nature and wildlife and stuff. And I, was privileged to talk to every single one from Lizzie Daly, George Monbiot, and everyone in between. It was just, I was very lucky to have it, but I was starting to get, I don't want to say bored of it because it wasn't, it's not the right word, but I was itching for change. It was like I didn't want it to get stagnant as a show, so I wanted to start changing it. So I said to Nadia, would you be up for jumping in on this? And basically we both feel the same, that there's big topics that aren't being dived into that are accessible. So yeah, that's where it kind of took its change and spin, and Nadia joined the little team.
Yeah, I mean, you make a perfect entry point for my next question, which is kind of about barriers to entry in the conservation space. It can be really difficult to find your voice in this sphere. So how do you guys feel where you're placed to be able to dismantle kind of those notions, and how do you approach that conversation?
I feel like the very fact that Ryan is in nature conservation work, and I reckon most nature conservationists would say that you're not, I think, would delegitimize the work that Ryan does. I maybe have more credentials because I worked for a big NGO for 14 years. Not, but like in their by their rule book, right? Doing various roles, like I've done kind of ecological surveys, I've done environmental policy and all kinds of like organizational project management and all of these, stupid things. So stupid.
Ridiculous
silly
notions.
Little things. And I had this career for a really long time, and it was just always like, even, I don't know, I guess there's so many barriers because I think it's so conservative and in its outlook and in its approach. I think the barriers to working for nature utterly reflect the lack of nature and the lack of ambition and the lack of hope that people feel. People feel like equal anxiety and people feel a bit hopeless. I think it's totally reflected in the nature and the behavior of the conservation industry. It lacks, first of all, it lacks the vulnerability, heart, soul, and spirituality, that nature, which is the reason why everyone got into nature in the first place, because it's a deeply spiritual connection that we can't really voice or vocalize. It's an individual experience. It completely lacks that. And then in terms of like imagination, vision, and willing to break down oppressive systems, it's not doing that stuff either. It's just kind of like it's an institution. You know, you could walk around the offices and filing cabinets of these institutions and just be like, could be any kind of business, with all these different kind of role titles. And I think, I guess for people who have never seen themselves in those kind of roles, wouldn't necessarily kind of feel comfortable going into those spaces. However, they could be and probably are absolutely brilliant and have ideas and thoughts about how they can change the world. But there's not a vacancy for that role, I guess, if that answers the question.
Absolutely. Ryan, did you want to jump in? Or...
I think also it's always perceived as, you know, very black and white and very one way or the other. And I think something that I've learned with Into the Wild, by talking to people on the ground, you know, in this country, in Europe, in Southern Africa, and in Americas and stuff, is, you know, everything's incredibly nuanced. And I think we pressure ourselves on having to sit one way or the other. And I think that stops people from going into certain aspects of a job because they might not fit that mold that everyone expects you to kind of think this or think that, and it can push you away. I think there's quite a lot of beauty about sitting in the nuance and sitting in the going, I actually don't know how I feel. And we try and reflect that on Into the Wild, really, by me and Nadia just having the discussion. You know, we don't have the answers all the time, because I'm not going to sit there and tell you how to feel about something. I'm just going to talk to you about it, and it's up to you to go on that journey on your own. And, you know, if you don't figure it out ever, that's still okay. And I think, you know, not enough open dialogue and a lot of open chats happen. And when I say that, I don't mean just talking, because there's a lot of can I swear on this podcast? So I keep stopping myself swear. Okay, cool. I was just checking before, because I keep stopping myself. There's like a lot of people fucking chat, but they don't. And not a lot of people listen to each other and proper listen. I mean, like, actually sit there and go, oh, I didn't know that. And I think, you know, actually looking at yourself and going, how often in a conversation did I say, oh, I didn't know that, or oh, I don't know, and start to reflect on that. And it kind of creates a safer space and a more pleasant space on having that conversation. I've got friends within this sector that we disagree on a lot of things, but we have the most wonderful chats about them, and then we go away and play a game of pool afterwards, and, you know, it's all good. And I think welcoming that more into the sector itself would massively change and make people feel more comfortable, even if they might not fit the mold that has been created.
Well, to that point, I mean, there are so many people that I can think of that come to mind in the conservation space who don't have letters after their name, who don't have PhDs, who might have entered into this space through a really convoluted, complicated way and felt as though they didn't belong here. So to have those conversations where you can put your hand up and say, I didn't know that. We're not experts. We're not ornithologists. We're just people that are curious and interested. And I think that's a really fresh and vibrant approach.
Also, like, Elle, it's just like, it's nuts as well, right? Like, as humans, right, the conservation sector is telling us this is the gaslighting that happens. You should care about wildlife and nature and learn about it. They will say it's really sad that children know more brand logos than they do the shapes of leaves. They'll do all of this stuff where it's like, you should know nature. But crucially, nobody's fighting for a system where everybody has an actual, real, practical agency to do something about it. So they're saying on the one hand, everybody should care and connect about nature, and everyone should have a relationship with it. These are the kind of like the big charitable objectives that the sector says. But then also, there's only few of us that are going to do it, and you can pay us to do it. So none of that makes sense. Like,
and to hear us do it.
And the thing is, as a human, when you get to the point where you've built a spiritual connection with wildlife and nature, and that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter where you live. It can be, because I grew up in a town that was it was an ex-mining town, right? So it's fairly industrial. But like the wildlife that I talk of was like the stuff in the park, the stuff in the backyard. Like, the connections that I made were beautiful, and they've stuck with me. And so when you start to make a connection, immediately what I want to do is then care and protect the thing, because I start to love the thing. But because I don't own land, and I can't just go out and protect stuff, and I can't just tell companies to stop polluting. I completely lack agency. And so the only channel to channel your pain and the love and care is to go into the conservation sector. And they dictate the rules. And so it's like this really simple, really frustrating thing of like, of course, anyone can do what everyone should do, what they do best for the thing that they love. And if it's taxidermy, it's taxidermy. And if it's music, and if it's community groups or whatever it might be that you do, like, but it's just so unscripted, and there's not enough evidence and opportunities that we, that exist for people, like you said, without letters after their name, that just kind of want to do something.
Mm-hmm.
You hit my nerve, my kind of like, this is my like.
No, we love the passion. I feel like that's what makes you guys such incredibly communicative and relatable hosts. And I think kind of brings me to the way that you are so colloquial and kind of use humor as well to interject a softer approach to what is a really scary world, which brings me to how you guys separate from the heaviness and the potential eco-anxiety of exploring these really heavy topics.
Drugs and alcohol.
We listen, we don't judge.
Yeah, well, yeah, don't do as we do. Humor. It is good. I mean,
humor, of course.
There you go.
Right. Yeah. But I actually, that's something I say to Nadia all the time. Like, whether I say it in jest or I say it seriously on the phone or on record, I always go, oh, if you don't laugh, we cry. And as I wipe a tear away from my face. And it is, there's no other way I can talk or communicate without making a joke. And sometimes that does not land, and sometimes it does. And I've always had that kind of humor brain that goes, I might as well laugh while I'm doing this. And it literally can be anything, whether I'm doing a eulogy at a funeral, which is, I'm not exaggerating, or whether it's, doing a podcast about the climate crisis or trophy hunting in Namibia. It doesn't matter. I will always try and find the funny in it. And I think you have to use, to do that, you have to kind of you have to make that connection. I don't think it is dividing the two apart. I think you are finding, personally, for me, it's finding the funny within. Yeah. I'm not finding the funny to the side. I'm not separating people away from it. I'm going, it's like setting up any joke is like serious punchline. And that's literally, I think, what I've tried to do with podcasts. It's like, do the serious bit, make a joke where you can. And it creates a better flow. It keeps people on the path more. And I think it stops people from just going, the world's on fire, what am I going to do? Personally, for me, I'm having all these deep chats and, going to these countries and seeing the hard front line. I don't know, just doing things that I love generally is how I get through it, whether it's going to play pool with my mate Mick for 2 hours and going, this is all I'm doing this evening. And I'm not going on my phone. I'm just going to play and lose at pool, or I'm going to make a soup and stuff like that. It's so simple human things that make me go, this is my moment. This is my little space, and I'll be all right. That's how I get through it.
I feel like you mentioned doing a eulogy at a funeral, and this is what it is, right? It's grief, and if you have a relative that dies, you have to do grief. So you either cry every day forever, or you work through it, and then you realize some days you have to start to learn that it never leaves you. And anyone that has lost someone close to them will realize that it changes you, it never leaves you, but then you just become something different. And if you resist the fact that you're becoming something different, then life gets quite hard, actually. And the same with nature. And if you see nature the way that I do, which is actually, I think, the right way, I won't say that all the time, but I think it is our kin, right? It is our, we are not separate from it. I think I'm sure everyone agrees. We are of it.
In this room, at least.
And in this room, I hope.
Literally between the three of us,
so
I think
when
it's
our
fine.
kin are dying, it is grief work. So you do the same. Yeah. If we don't process the grief, then we get something called really bad eco-anxiety. And I think that we do have a job to do to process that grief, so that we have the muscle memory of being able to flip in and out of being in despair, and then having a game of pool with Ryan the next minute and laughing. And I think as a personal thing, I've worked massively on being able to step the muscle memory of stepping in and out of those things quite well. And I can be, in floods of tears and I go, do you know what? I'm just going to watch something on Netflix and then be laughing the next minute. Because I used to beat myself up and be like, oh, I'm just being avoidant. Like, I'm just like, because I'm a Westerner, I can afford the food I want, I can do what I want. I'm just kind of ignoring the climate crisis. And I'm like, do you know what? No, actually, I'm actually flipping between the two. Otherwise, I'm useless. I think maybe, I do like to have a laugh, and I do like to, I really do. And Ryan has really helped me pushed to get, I think, edgier with my humor. Like, I think I would always give the things that really upset me a wide berth, but I think Ryan's helped me still to make fun of and find levity in some of like the things that have brought me a lot of pain. I guess in the same way as you make jokes about the deceased at a funeral, right? Like, get close to it.
Yeah, you might as well.
Yeah.
You talk about heavy topics, you talk about light topics. One of the projects that you have worked on recently, but I know it's not your only trip, is visiting, or you mentioned it earlier. In fact, let you guys introduce it.
So our recent project is we went, so I've been to Namibia with Into the Wild before Nadia joined, and we made Beyond the Trigger, an award-winning film that's available on YouTube if you'd like to watch it, which explores trophy hunting, but talking and hearing from the rural communities in the conservancies in Namibia. And I always kept touch with a load of people in Namibia that I'd met. They became friends on WhatsApp and checked in. And then I just felt like I wanted to go back. And I was aware the drought was still going on, and kind of, I mean, it's kind of classic Ryan, to be honest. It's done, it hurricanes in, it suddenly happens, and 20 minutes later, me and Nadia are on a plane going to Namibia. It was very quick.
With champagne.
Yeah, with champagne. But we're calling it a journey back to Namibia, and Nadia and I went for. We were actually on the ground for about 6-7 days, and driving to different communities. And this time was actual. This felt more. I mean, I was with the community last time, but this felt a lot more with farmers and meeting and actually seeing the community systems. It was a lot of the conservancy looking at the kind of committees I was doing last time. This time was a lot more sat with farmers, talking with them, hearing about how they're farming at the moment. I mean, and I say this every time I talk about this, I'm going back there, and I sometimes stutter as I talk, so I get a bit upset about it, because they were going through. When we were there, it was a 12-year long drought in the regions of Namibia we were in, and visibly so.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, 2 years later after I went, it was visibly worse. It looked like a burnt landscape. That's all I can describe it as. Trees were not just like kind of our autumn trees, dead and waiting, or dormant, waiting to come back. They were burnt, like gone. It was just lifeless almost. Landscape stunning, but life was not massively there. And Nadia and I did shed quite a few tears of an evening, because you're sat with these people, asking them, you're coming from a country like England, and a nation like the UK, and we're just turning up and asking them, how are you coping? And you felt the desperation, but the answer's so simple. There's just a couple of things they need, water and money, literally it. And we're sat there with those things. We have these things in our country, so it was quite a hard trip. It was a privileged trip to go on, and we're basically turning this into a 4-part series. So we explore the climate crisis in Namibia, introducing Namibia as a country, looking at the climate crisis, looking at food security, and looking at community work, both with wildlife and the community as a strength, and a unit. But it was really hard. I came back and all my friends were like, "Did you have a great time?" And I was like, "I had a time." I can't really call it a great time. It still plays on my mind every time I flush a toilet, every time I fill the kettle up.
Man, honestly, I have to tell people when they come around to my house, like, I'm so sorry, but I'm not going to flush unless there's like 4 wheeze in there, and you're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. It really changed my outlook.
On that point, Ryan, like, I think one of the things that we do try and do with the podcast is, Ryan and I and yourself, Elle, understand Western conservation really well. Its methodologies, its philosophies and ideologies that sit behind Western conservation, that are very much around preservation at all costs. It almost nature operates in like this higher space above humans, and we have a really weird kind of like hierarchical ranking of wildlife that mirrors how we hierarchy humans, and with white men being at the top. And I think what I think is a really useful anecdote or tool that doesn't exist enough in Western conservation. I've spoken to conservation students. I've seen the kind of how to do conservation textbooks. There are not enough examples of what other countries outside of the UK and outside of Western conservation look like. So we can't even imagine different ways. And so Namibia is really good to, well, people haven't heard the podcast yet because we haven't edited it or done all the bits. But I guess we're getting to demonstrate back what does human wildlife relationship land look like, and it's completely different. It's kind of almost, it's unrecognizable. The systems, the ideologies, the philosophies, the way money works, the way government works, the way people live are often on the land, it's different to our system. And I think, gosh, we need more exposure to different systems. So I think that's what I'm really excited about, being able to kind of show people.
And I'm also really like kind of just excited to share, quite simply just share these conversations. We spoke to a lot of people. We asked them, the same questions each, and just to have these voices shared that they never really, they seldomly get heard, right? I've watched nature documentaries all my life. I never hear these voices in many or any countries. So it's kind of again a privilege and an honor to really go like, we had this conversation with them, and we're going to take their voice and kind of remind people that, whilst we're seeing these subtle changes of the climate crisis, whether it's daffodils coming out in December, colder colder summers, or more mild winters, there's places in the world that are suffering a lot more, and this is what they have to say about it. So yeah, it's kind of I get a bit nervous sometimes because it feels like a quite heavy mantle to have to do, or a lot of pressure. But at the same time, when Nadia and I have recorded the first episode, which is out on the 3rd of February, it actually was quite nice to revisit and journey back and talk about it. It felt quite natural for me and Nadia to do so. So it's really exciting to kind of bring this series to people's ears, and yeah, hopefully it sheds a bit more light on a different aspect of the climate crisis we don't always hear directly from the ground about.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to put those links out and get everyone listening. I am fascinated in the growth of your podcast to move from something that exists online and in people's ears to actually tangible outreach. And I know that you do public events. So, for example, you host your podcast live at Global Bird Fair. How do you feel about moving into a space where you're met with the experts, the ornithologists, the people with those letters after their name? Are there battles or kind of challenges that you have to
not
overcome?
at those events? No, I actually don't. No, never.
Okay.
I think I really don't. I mean,
for you.
I can talk to anyone. You put me in front of anyone. I don't get nervous. I get stuff like that. Like I'm happy and comfortable around talking with people. It's probably one of the only things I'd say about myself, which is my strength. I can, talk to anyone. So I don't really get nervous especially if I'm doing a live show, because I feel in live show mode. So I'm usually, you've both seen me at Bird Fair. I'm extroverted times 200. I'm running around talking. So I'm just totally in a blaze. But
you extroverted.
But I do get nervous at events around these people, at academic events. That's where I get nervous, because I don't feel safe at those events. And when I say I don't feel safe, I'm not I'm not in danger. I'm not a threat or anything like that. But I do. I'm not surrounded by people I know, and I don't know I don't know what fork to eat with first, or I don't know. And I know I've been at events like this. I'm not exaggerating, or I'm not quite sure whether I'm allowed to swear in conversation to these people or stuff like that. That totally different vibe. That's where I don't feel comfortable. Which is mad to say at Bird Fair. I do feel comfortable with that, but I just find more my people. I guess.
I think the best way to find out about the fork, the swearing thing, is just do it and see what face they make, Ryan. I think I feel different. I feel I'm hit and miss. I think I have a lot of imposter syndrome sometimes, and then I have a word with myself and just go, Nadia, you know what you're talking about. And I think, here's an example. I went to this thing a few years ago, and I was on like a bit of a feminist journey where I was understanding the patriarchy, and it became really apparent to me how the patriarchy had affected my life. And I was just like, oh, right, okay. And I set up a group for women to talk about this stuff. And this group had been going a couple of years and been exploring some of these ideas. People had shared their ideas, but also as a woman, I've spent my life talking to women, telling me about the shit that they go on. And then I went to this event and it was full of really like academic feminists. And then they kept asking me like if I'd read all of these seminal feminist texts. And I was like, no. And then I felt really like, oh my God, I can't have an opinion on this. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm a woman. I can have an opinion. And also like, you know, a lifelong experience of talking to women and being a woman in the patriarchy. I was just like, oh my God, and I do have to like, you know, sometimes be like, actually, I've spent a life in nature and I've worked in the sector, and whilst I haven't done it in an academic sense, like I actively disagree with academia in the way that it presents. So why am I being, why, why can't I just be like, all right, that's your academic answer to what I've just said. Okay. And so I think I do have big moments of imposter syndrome, and then I have a strong word with myself afterwards. So it hit or miss. I wouldn't say it's a particular place. I think side note, I worked for the Right to Own campaign, and we published a book last year called Wild Service, and my chapter is like a damning breaking apart of the nature conservation sector. And when that was published, I was like, oh God, it's actually now written and published. It feels less scary than a podcast. I mean, it feels more scary than a podcast, than something being like forever now in the British Library collection. Nadia says this.
Yeah. So if people are listening and feeling kind of like they're on the fence about taking up space in this sector, could you give advice perhaps for how somebody might approach doing that in a way that feels authentic and genuine? Because I think a lot of people are in a situation where they have things to say, but maybe the space isn't.
I think there's two things here. I think if you have a story you'd like to tell, then there should be any little voice in your head saying, don't tell your story. Do not trust it. There's no reason why, as a species, what we're best at is storytelling. You shouldn't tell your story. And whether that is verbally around a fire, whether that is written, whether that is self-publishing, whether that is through visual art, or whether that through whatever medium you choose, and you want to choose podcast, then fundamentally, when you break it down, is your right as a human being to storytell. And there is absolutely no script, or there's no rules for which criteria a human needs to meet in order to be worthy of telling a story. And I will never trust a voice that tells you that what you have to muse on, how the world has affected you and how you want to talk about that, is valid and right, and it's your human right. Because podcasting is a medium. It's a medium through which we're communicating our stories, and but what paired with that, there are some real practical skills, financial and techie barriers. Find yourself a Cockney who's at least 6 foot tall. At least.
Why am I the minimum requirement of height?
I actually don't know your proper height, otherwise I'd said
6'7". What did you say?
I said at least 6 foot.
Oh, okay.
Not even close.
Not even close.
I mean, I think when it comes to like the practical, technical things of how to do it, I am not an expert in that field, but I am sure there are bursaries for people who are wanting to get into the arts and communication. Search, Google things like that, to be able to explore that, and maybe, but I'm not an expert. I literally just turned up. I just turned up every month on Zoom with Ryan. He told me where to be, and I did it.
I would say there's a few points for me, and these are all points that I've had to learn, which is why I kind of like tell people. I get a few people asking me like, I want to start a podcast, what do I do? Or I want to get into this. There's one thing is, first of all, like, just always be yourself unless loads of people are telling you your shit. As in, like, you're a shit person. Like, obviously reflect on yourself. I mean, like, if people are going like you're being a dick, wind your neck in. But like, also, like, be true to yourself. Like, if you feel like you're hiding or shielding yourself, don't be afraid to kind of break down those walls a little bit and go a bit further, because life is about making mistakes anyway. You will always get things wrong. It's kind of how you reflect and go forward with that, rather than never letting yourself get to that mistake stage. The other thing is, like, there's not an episode I've released, and we're on, I can't even remember, I mean, 160 episodes maybe. There's not one I've released that I've not thought, oh, this is shit. But then but do you know what I mean? I've got so much self-doubt. So if you're sat there going, I think, or I'm not going to be very good at it, or is it worth doing? You're unlikely. If you're sat there thinking I'm amazing and I'm going to nail all of this, then I'd say that's an unhealthier place to be in. It's healthier to be kind of, self-critical sometimes, because that's the kind of norm, I guess. So I don't. Everyone has that feeling. Literally everyone does. You're a creative, Elle. You have that feeling. Nadia, you've had that feeling. And any other creatives listening to this show now knows that, yeah, you always think that. So don't let that stop you as well. Like, push past that barrier. And I can't even remember what the other one was. Oh, find what.
Well, that's part of it.
I was going to say, find what you love and just do it. Whatever part of the creativity or whatever part of the nature sector it is, if you love it, just go headfirst into it and do it. Learn about it, read about it, be it. Is the best thing, I would say. That's, I love talking to people. That's why I went into podcasting.
What is failing, right? How many listeners? 4 listeners failing? Is 100 listeners failing? Like, what is failing?
I mean, it's part of the human experience to fail, and I think it's really important for people to hear that.
This is it. When I first started, our episodes were getting 100 downloads an episode, and I would sit there and be like, oh, I wish it would grow, until someone said to me, if that was 100 people sat in a room listening to you talking, you'd be over the moon. And I'd be like, that's such a good point. And it's just different. It's how you look at it. It's all a reflective kind of thing. So but like I said, like every single episode, I always come back and go, oh, I could have done that better, or I should have done that, or I should have done that. But sometimes it's like, that's just an anxiety in your head, just running around. Like you change and you grow, and you will never be incredible on episode 1 or on your first film or your first book or anything. Everything's a learning process.
Guys, it's been such a pleasure, and I really don't want to have to let you go, but I know you're both busy people. I'd love to let you promote. Where can we find the new episodes, your show? Please plug your links. And
Did you see Nadia sit back at that bit? What's the matter, Nadia? You're not gonna do it? I'll do it. Literally, she nearly fell off her chair. She sat back so
do you know
quick.
what? There is a little diva part of me, just a little diva part of me, but it's part of my character. And you said be myself.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. There's now a bit of her that goes, no, I'm going to do it just because I've mocked it, but I'm not going to let her. You can find Into the Wild, obviously, wherever you get your podcasts. On all the best podcast apps is on there. Our new Namibia series starts. It's a monthly series that comes out on first Monday of every month, so starting on the 3rd of February, and will lead us all the way to May. Probably March, April, May. That's correct, Jep. And then in between that, new for 2025, Into the Wild's doing a weekly nature news series, where Nadia and I bring some weekly nature topics to do with pretty much anything, and we give our hot takes and we unpack it and we have a discussion about it. A nice little pacey episode that comes out every single week. After our Namibia series, we'll go back to our monthly shows, as well as our weekly nature news, where we take big topics, literally anything, and unpack them. And if you're on socials, we're not on X. We're there, but we're not there. But we are on Instagram and Blue Sky. Obviously, just search Into the Wild Pod. I think that's everything.
Correct. You did well.
Guys, it's been so much fun. I'm so grateful for you giving up your time.
Thanks for having us on. This has been lovely.
See
ya. Bye.
Okay, there we go. Today's episode was such a good one. You can hear I had a great time. And I really appreciate your time, Nadia and Ryan. Thank you so much. So let's get to the socials, because it's really important that you guys follow the good work of these two. So to find Nadia, she's at Butte Blackbird. That's BUTEBLACKBIRD on Instagram. Ryan is at Mr. Ryan J. Dalton. That's Mr. Ryan J. Dalton. All of these links are in the show notes. So if I'm not doing a very good job at articulating slow enough the spelling, just find them in the episode description, and you can find their incredible podcast at Into the Wild Podcast. It streams on all platforms, and make sure you catch up with their new project, Journey Back to Namibia. I think by the time this episode goes out, episode 2 would have just dropped, so you'll have some catching up to do, plenty to enjoy and get stuck in as you take beautiful spring walks. Here in the UK, spring is just peeping around the corner, the days are getting longer, and the birds are singing, the sky is blue, the blossoms are out, and it's making everyone feel so good. We're ready for you, spring. I hope wherever you are in the world, all the seasons are doing the best. They're making you feel good, and you're making sure you get out into nature and enjoy this incredibly beautiful planet that we have. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, I'm open to feedback. I'd love to hear from you, especially regarding the introduction of today's episode. Thank you to all of my very loyal listeners. I know this has been a bit of an evolution, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future has in store for Specimens. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Ryan and Nadia, and I will see you next time.